מה קורה אביב?
מעניין עם נבות.
טירוף, אתה יודע שזה אני חושב הפרק האחרון שאנחנו עושים מרחוק, לפחות עד אתה יודע, לפחות שאנחנו מקליטים מישהו מחול,
כן,
ומשבוע הבא יש אולפן מחדש.
תענוג. יש לנו פרק באנגלית, אז תכינו את עצמכם, ולפני שנגיד שלום לאורח המאוד מעניין שיש לנו היום, נגיד תודה לנותנת החסות שלנו, תוכנית הצמיחה לסטארט-אפים של אינטל איגנייט, תוכנית שעכשיו מתפשטת לעוד אזורים בעולם, הם מקימים את התוכנית שלהם בארצות הברית ובגרמניה, ובטח יהיו עוד הרבה מקומות כמו שאנחנו מכירים את צחי, תוכנית עולמית של אינטל שמזמינה יזמים וסטארט-אפים בשלבי Seed עד A להגיש מועמדות ולשפר את סיכויי ההצלחה שלהם. אז אם אתם יזם או יזמת עם סטארט-אפ טכנולוגי מדהים, אחרי שגייסתם כמיליון דולר, באינטל איגנייט מאוד ישמחו לדבר איתכם, שימו כרגע לבחור את הסטארט-אפים של הבאץ' הנוכחי, אבל הם תמיד שמחים להיות בקשר עם סטארט-אפים אחרים, זו תוכנית הדגל של מנכ"ל אינטל, והיא מייצרת הזדמנויות עסקיות לחברות שלה בכל רחבי העולם, 12 שבועות, עובדים שם על המון דברים כדי לשפר את סיכויי ההצלחה של הסטארט-אפ, הפרודקט, הטכנולוגיה, כמובן הפרודקט מרקט פיט, וכמובן אינטל לא לוקחת מכם תשלום או אחוזי בעלות בחברה. Let's say good morning to Ian Siegel. Hi Ian.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
So Ian, good morning. So as part of your name, I imagine you're part of the tribe, right?
I am Jewish. I assume that's the question you're asking.
Yeah. Any Hebrew? Any Hebrew knowledge from Bar Mitzvah?
I was bar mitzvahed and I studied Hebrew for about 6 years. That was probably 35 years ago, but I still have a little, so I can still say things like Ani rotzeh hafsacha, but that's about it.
הפסקה.
Hafsaka, there we go. Yeah.
Do you know what it means?
I think it means I want recess. It shows where my Hebrew education stopped, so you can see the level they trained me up to.
Okay, but at least you know to ask what you want, which is
Yeah.
good.
That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
But we're not here to speak about your bar mitzvah or heritage, unless you want to, but to speak about the company you founded 10 years ago, Ziprikroter. The first time I heard about your company was because of the fact that I'm an avid listener to podcasts, and you are constantly promoting yourself through podcasts, right?
That is correct. I think we were probably one of the first or the first major advertiser on podcasts. And to some degree, part of the reason for the explosion of popularity in the channel is we turned podcasting into something you could do as a living because we were actually paying people, advertising dollars for their podcasts, where before a lot of it was done by hobbyists who were enthusiasts about a subject. And so they would put out a podcast.
Why did you decide to promote yourself or advertise on podcasts?
I have been doing startups for, wow, I'm going to say more than 25 years. And one of the truisms that I have learned about startups is if you do everything the same as your competition, particularly if you're a later entrant into a market space, then you're doomed to be second or third in your category because you're not going to be better at whatever the standard practice is than the people who've been operating and using that practice for years. So we always, at every business I've been at, have looked for unique new marketing opportunities or marketing channels. And the cool thing about those channels is if you can find them early, they tend to be very cheap relative to the value that they drive. It takes a long time for the rest of the market to catch up and a natural auction to form to truly price those products at the value that they deliver. So it's a great way to grow a business fast.
And what kind of ROI did you see on promoting yourself on a podcast?
Podcasts are funny because if you run a radio ad, you know the day and time that radio ad is going to run, and then you can measure the immediate impact of that and the tail of that impact over time. Whereas with podcasts, effectively they get put out into the internet universe, and you don't really know what the schedule of download and listening is going to be. So it's much harder to measure. we did a sustained test over many months, and where we sort of started at, we thought what was a reasonable investment level. And then as our business grew over those months, we were able to parse and attribute a significant portion of that success to the podcast. But it's definitely not one of those channels you can just flip on and see immediately in a chart that it started to work right away, which is actually one of my sayings, which I say this all the time inside. Like, when something works, the day it launches, you can find it on a chart. You know the day it went live. And podcast was like a little bit more of a leap of faith where we had to watch and be patient, but it definitely works.
And okay, so what is ZipRecruiter?
So ZipRecruiter is a marketplace for either finding talent if you are an employer or finding jobs if you are a job seeker. We support both sides of that marketplace. We started on the employer side, and our initial pitch was post to over 100 job boards with one submission, and then have all the candidates from all those different job boards come into one easy to review list. And then for job seekers, initially we did the opposite, which is we said, search all the jobs on the web at one site. So for employers, we were what's called a super distributor. And for job seekers, we were a super aggregator.
What
And
made you
what's
start the company? Sorry, Navot.
Yeah. Well, ZipRecruiter is the first company that I founded and built from the ground up. But prior to that, I had worked for really a blue chip list of what would be considered relatively famous internet companies in the United States, all of which either had successful IPOs or sold. And at those companies, I was an executive, and I didn't just manage a team, I managed teams. And in the earlier days of the internet, these companies were often too small to have large HR departments that would do the recruiting for you. So when I was managing teams, I would personally be managing the hiring process. So I not only was the team leader, I was the HR professional for those teams. And back then, if you wanted to post a job, you would start on Monster and you would go push the job up through their page. Then you'd take the exact same job and you'd go to Career Builder and you'd put it up there. And then you'd go to Hot Jobs and then you'd go to Craigslist and then you'd go to Dice. And it was this incredibly labor intensive process just to get the jobs out there. And then the worst part is when the candidates came in, every site had a different way of sending you those candidates. So what we all did is we would print out resumes, and you ended up with these iconic stacks of resumes on desks. And I just remember I got the idea for ZipRecruiter. I was staring at my desk, and I probably had 900 resumes printed out covering my desk. I mean, it was just a sea of resumes I was about to have to go through for all these different open roles. And I was like, I would do anything to not have to go through all these resumes. And that was when the idea for ZipRecruiter hit me. I was just like, why isn't this online? This is a crazy thing that I am doing. I spend most of my time recruiting. So I was really trying to build an efficiency tool initially that would help me personally, solving the pain point that I felt. And it turned out a lot of other people were feeling the same pain point.
Okay, so you started the company almost 10 years ago. You really took the time with recruiting, with raising capital, right?
Yeah, I mean, I had the idea and I corralled 3 co-founders to work with me, and we were building the site part-time while we all had full-time jobs. And then we launched the site, and the day we launch, we get 12 customers, and we haven't raised any money at this point, and we were basically profitable day one.
Wow.
And I looked at my
Wow.
partners and I said, you know what? We've been working for VC-backed businesses our entire career, and no matter how much success we achieve, what do they say? They just say more, faster, bigger, go, mush, right? Like there's no amount that's ever satisfied. And I was like, we might have something really special here because it's so rare you nail product market fit day one. And we really found a big appetite in the market. And so we made a decision that we were going to bootstrap the business as opposed to raise money. So for the first 4.5 years, we didn't take any outside capital. And, we'd been building internet companies for a couple decades. So we were really good at this, but we got the business to north of 50 million in revenue, and we had
Wow.
millions in cash flow before we ever took $1 of outside capital.
So
So
what
why
made
did
you?
why
Yeah.
did you want to raise capital?
Isn't that the question? Everybody asks me this question. Why would you do that? It sounds awesome. Well, at that point, we had over 100 employees. And I think there comes a moment in a business's life when, if you are bootstrapping, you start to realize the full potential of what you're building. And though we were doing tens of millions in revenue, we realized we could be doing hundreds of millions in revenue. And we were literally inhibited at this point by the amount of available capital that we had, because we had all these marketing channels deployed that were working with incredibly high proficiency. And we literally couldn't keep increasing the investment because we didn't have enough available capital to do it. And I just thought, it's so rare you find product market fit. It's so rare you're on a tear from a momentum perspective the way we were. And I thought I almost had a responsibility to see how big it could get. So we took the capital to sort of supercharge our growth, and also to not just keep the current 100 employees we had, but to become a more attractive destination to recruit the kind of top tier talent that would take us to the next version of our product, because this category has shifted incredibly over the last 5 years in particular. Like, people are not aware of the revolution that's going on in recruiting software. It's the stuff we're building today bears no resemblance to the job boards you've used your entire life.
In what's
So yeah, sorry, I never used a job board, and Aviv also. I don't think he did.
no.
What
Yeah,
changed?
yeah, I've always described the life of sort of engineers as being, you never look for work, work always finds you. It's like being the only woman on a desert island with 100 dudes. It's like, yeah. But so you guys really don't understand how the rest of the world works. But it basically, what we relied on online job boards up through about 2016 is what I call fate or chance or serendipity, because employers would post and job seekers would come search, and it was really a do-it-yourself activity where it was the likelihood that you found the right job for you was entirely dependent on the keywords that you entered into the search engine for that job board. And most people, let's face it, get no training in how to search effectively for a job. They're not experts at writing Boolean expressions, so they're not going to use a job search site the way it's really designed to be used. And the revolution that I'm talking about happened with the introduction of both machine learning and deep learning algorithmic approaches for matching job seekers and employers. What happens today, as versus what used to happen, is we not only have all the job description content, we have all the resume content from the job seekers, and these algorithms can do matching that is extraordinary because it learns from basically the wisdom of the crowd. This is how I always describe the algorithm, right? So it's not just saying like, oh, look, your job title in your last job matched the job title of this job this person posted. It's actually saying, you look like a bunch of other people I've seen before, and here's the whole group of job titles for which, when they've applied, employers have liked these kinds of people who look like you. So I'm going to show you all those jobs. I'm going to prompt you to apply to those jobs. And so the quality of matching and the quality of applications has been going up at a historic rate, particularly over the last 2 years. So to give you some perspective on this from a data standpoint, if I just look at the old world where like job seekers had to go find jobs and apply to what they thought they were fit for, 1 in 6 of those applications would get a thumbs up from an employer. When I look at the most recent algorithm that ZipRecruiter has deployed, where it tells you to apply to a job, the thumbs up rate is over 65%. So greater than
And
1
it's
in
being
2.
done by big data and AI, right? Like what you did.
100%. Yeah, it's using data signal that has never been available before to job sites.
Okay,
And yeah,
and what do you guys do in Israel?
So it's really been sort of 2 historic periods in ZipRecruiter. There was the distribution period where we said, okay, we're going to get you as many candidates as we can. And then when we pursued that strategy, we're really good at it. So instead of getting you 20 candidates for a job, we'd get you 30, then 50, then 70, then 100. And it turns out that the more candidates you deliver to an employer, the more frustrated and upset they become. Because what they really want is really like 5 great candidates and 15 good ones so that they can see that the 5 great ones are great. That's really all they want. And so about 5 years ago, we did a hard pivot. It's part of why we raised the money to focus instead of on quantity of applicants, on quality of applicants. And that's when we made the big shift to using these new form of algorithms. But the talent to build these algorithms is sparse. This is really cutting edge, almost bleeding edge technology. There aren't a lot of people who have used this technology for applications like ours. So after scouring Los Angeles, New York, San Francisco, every part of Silicon Valley, we finally found the talent that we were looking for in Israel. And so we opened an office there. I think it started with 11 employees and we now have over 100.
How
Really?
did you
Wow.
found these employees? Did you acquire a company, or how did it go?
I'm fortunate in that my chief operating officer is a guy named Jeff Swelling, who prior to working as my COO has been only a CEO and had a incredible run of building and selling companies. And his last company did a lot of its engineering in Israel. So he had deep ties to the community in Israel and was able to network his way to what everyone knows is the most important hire, the first hire, which was our VP of engineering in Israel. And then it turns out, as I'm sure you guys know, that a lot of people who went to the military together got their training there. And then when you hire one, recruiting and networking is much different. I don't want to say easier because it's very competitive, but you know, there's an abundance of talent and all the talent knows each other. So as long as you have a credible business and you are willing to pay market rates or above market rates, you're golden. And so that has been our experience in Israel.
So how long ago did you open the R&D center here?
Oh, I think it's 4 years ago that we opened the R&D center.
And what do
you
these
grew.
engineers do?
They do a lot of what I consider our most important technology. So it's a lot of the matching algorithm work. It's a lot of the resume parsing work. It's also a lot of our backend systems work because we move just incredible quantities of data around in order to do the matching that we do. I mean, this is the truth about if you're using either machine learning or deep learning, which is it takes not millions or hundreds of millions, but billions of data points to do it well. That's why I always laugh when startups say they're using machine learning, by the way. I was like, okay, good luck with that. Yeah, I'm sure you are. But so it's really like, you know, Israel is replete with some of the best data scientists and the best software engineers in the world. And so we give them many of our hardest to accomplish tasks.
Ian, let's talk about what happened in December 2018. That was a data breach for you guys. What happened there?
You know, it's the nature of being a company that's growing in celebrity. I mean, we are probably not as well known in Israel, but we do well over $100 million a year of marketing in the United States every year. So,
Ian, I think that everyone that listens to podcasts
yes,
heard
okay,
about you guys.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So you're pretty known.
yeah, and
So
that's
when
our
you,
audience, right?
yeah, yeah. So when you become famous as a company, you become a target. And so we were targeted, and we learned a valuable lesson about the prioritization of security, which we had taken seriously, but we hadn't made it, you know, we hadn't put security above speed of development of new features. And I think that was a real lesson, a wake up call for us, if you will. And I mean, the only thing I would say about it is it would be much more difficult for someone to breach and get our data now than it was 2 years ago.
Take me back
But
to the moment that I don't know who told you, Ian, listen, we have a problem. Take me back to that point.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the data breach, it was a big deal, but it wasn't as big a deal as COVID, and it
Well,
wasn't as and it wasn't as big a deal as when the government in the U.S. had a shutdown because we have, you know, very vicious politics here, and so a lot of people were put on furlough and or weren't certain they were going to get their paychecks. A huge number of people are employed by the government. So while it was bad, I also have the perspective, and this is why I always say I don't understand how a 25-year-old can become a CEO, because I was not mature enough at 25. Like my emotional range was so much higher than it is today. So the data breach was, it barely made a blip on my radar. I was like, that sucks. Now we're going to stop everything. And the whole company is going to become a security company for the next 30 days while we make sure this can never happen again.
Mm.
And so it wasn't devastating or upsetting. And I have a lot of sayings. You work as long as I have, you start to develop like a real credo about how startups work. And one of my sayings is, don't solve a problem until you have it. But when you have it, solve the shit out of it. So like once we had a data breach, it was like, that will never, ever, ever happen again. And so I believe that was a lesson learned, problem solved, and we're a better company for it.
For how long the bridge was open?
God, I can't even remember. Honestly, I can't even remember the exact details of it at this point. I do remember the board meeting and he'll hate me for saying this, but I just remember that I told the board the details of the breach, and one of my board members folded their arms on the table and then put their head down so that their forehead was touching their arms. And I was like, that's not what I want from you, board member. That's not the support I need right now. I know it's a problem. I know it's bad. You don't have to make this big dramatic show of how upset you are. I'm upset too. I'm holding it together. I'm asking you to do the same. So that's the thing I remember most.
Yeah. So Ian, you talked a bit about COVID. How did this affect your company and the industry?
I mean, COVID is obviously devastating. It's the 100-year storm. It's the thing that happens that you could never plan for, because we were a business that was growing as fast as we had ever grown, and we're in a boom economy up through the second week of March of 2020. And then literally in 1 week, basically the entire economy shut down. All live events were canceled. The WHO declared it a pandemic, and people started buying all the toilet paper and cleaning supplies in America. So there was like a panic going on, and no one was leaving their homes. You cannot. I mean, we're a job business. 80% of hiring stopped in 1 day. 80%. And so it was devastating. And I was truly, I went from the highest high I'd been on, thinking like, we're a company that's going to be generational, that we're going to be around. Your children will use ZipRecruiter and their children will hire on ZipRecruiter. Like that's who I thought we were.
Yeah.
To wondering,
and you're a unicorn, right?
And we're a unicorn. And I went from that to thinking, oh my God, we could be out of business in 12 months. Like if this just goes on like this and no one's hiring and no one's looking for work, then we're totally the wrong size and the wrong spend level for a company in that new reality. So I had to make really fast decisions. And honestly, when you talk to me about what were the real hard times in my career, that was the hardest. That was so 2 weeks after COVID started, I laid off 500 employees, which I did personally because I wanted them to see my face and know that it was my decision and own it and say like, look, I'm sorry this is happening, but I have to fight for the solvency of the company. We turned marketing down 80%. And the only stuff we left on was stuff we were contractually required to keep on, or we would have turned it down 100%. And then we just sort of battened down the hatches and tried to weather the storm. And fortunately, within 7 weeks of the initial shock to the system, we started to see a steady, persistent, and resilient recovery. And what happened for us, at least, is we'd so dramatically cut our costs that when we rebounded, like suddenly we were just a much better business. Not through, I always say it's like better to be lucky than good. And we were just like, suddenly we were a fantastic bit. Like we were a great business before, but now we are a fantastic business. And so in some ways, COVID has been a blessing and helped us, but I lose sleep at night when I think about the people we let go, because what was true of ZipRecruiter, which I think is true of a lot of startups, is it felt very much like a family. It felt like we were all going to battle together, and that's a real bonding experience. And there were a lot of really good people that we just couldn't afford to keep on anymore, and we had to let them go at a time when uncertainty was at its highest. And that it really didn't just tear me up; it tore up our leadership team and their peers. Like we were setting these people off into this sea of uncertainty, and we tried to do everything we could. Like we gave them extended health insurance, we gave them large severance, we did everything we could to set them up. And I believe that the majority did really well, actually, because the recovery was, like I said, 7 weeks later in the US.
But how big of percentage of the company did you let go?
We went from 1,200 employees down to 700 employees during the initial COVID.
That's
Yeah.
a lot.
And since then, you're hiring now, or you're still
Yeah,
trying
yeah.
to
I
keep it
think
small?
we're back up to close to 1,000 employees. We've been hiring rapidly just because the business is doing so well.
And there was an 80% decline, you said. How? What's the situation right now? Is it back to normal or not yet?
Well, I mean, so there has been incredible recovery. It's almost back to where it was, but it's not all the way back. And there's been a real shift in where business is coming from, because a bunch of categories that are really big hiring categories, so things like hospitality, which is going to be the hotels and the tourism industry, and restaurants and retail, which is where you buy you go to a store and you buy clothes. Like all these companies basically stopped hiring, and many of them shut down or went fully virtual. And so what we're seeing is a surge in new categories of jobs. COVID created big winners and big losers, and it was nothing to do with the merit or talents of the leadership teams of these businesses. It was like a roll of the dice, and you either got lucky or you didn't get lucky. And so we see, like, if you're in e-commerce right now, oh my God, this is the greatest
Yeah.
time. Is Zoom the greatest company in history or the company with the greatest timing in history? We'll never know, because they're worth so many billions of dollars now, right? Like, and I don't think there was any upside case that they had modeled where they're like, what's going to happen? The entire economy is going to shut down and everyone's going to need to use our product, not just for work, but our kids are going to need to use it to, like, go to school. Like that's
Ian,
yeah.
how was the board when you went into the board and tell them, listen, I know that I gave you projection for 2020, but now I'm giving you a new projection.
Well, I mean, fortunately for me, this 100-year storm didn't just hit me, it hit everyone. So, I think there were really three classes of companies that my board members were experiencing. Some of them were like ticketing companies for live events. Their revenue went to zero, like that, like overnight. And then there were some companies that were windfall winners of COVID, and suddenly their business was taking off, like drop shipping e-commerce companies. Oh my goodness, what a time to be in drop shipping, right? And then we were
Yeah.
the middle company, where, like, we were still making, tens of millions of dollars a month, but our revenue was falling really fast. And so they thought we had runway. And so we were not in the class that they were worried about, because initially they were just worried about the ones in triage, the companies that were on the cusp of dying immediately. So, like, it wasn't that hard to tell them. It was much harder to put the plan together and talk to the employees than it was to talk to the board. And I think that's like, I think when you have a healthy relationship with your board, they operate more like partners and not like a boss. Like, I didn't feel like I was going to tell my boss bad news. I felt like I was sharing with my partners what was going on, and they were participating and making plans with me.
Can you share a little bit about your numbers right now? Like, how much are you guys making?
Well, we don't publicly disclose anything, but I will say, we measure revenue in the hundreds of millions, and we're the fastest growing job site in the United States still. And one of the things I say to every new employee, I do a onboarding session with every new employee, and I say, I'm going to make you one promise. Here's my promise. Every month you're here, your job will get easier, because every month the product gets measurably better. And that's true.
So when are you guys going public?
We'll see.
Any immediate plans?
I definitely think we are a company that is built to go public, meaning that not only do we have incredibly healthy financials, but we provide a necessary and long-term need of the economy, which is hiring and or finding work. And then we happen to be at a moment where, unemployment went from under 4% in the United States to greater than 16% during COVID. And now it's trending back down. I think it just came back under 8%. So, but that means there's still many, many percentage points of unemployment to go. So a lot of people need to hire back up, and a lot of people need to find work right now. It's going to be a good few years here for ZipRecruiter.
Ian, we started our episode with your Hebrew and your Jewish heritage. I mean, we have an amazing podcast, right, Navot? But what made you, a CEO of a unicorn from the US, decide to come and be hosted on an Israeli podcast?
Well,
it's not your heritage, right?
It was, a little, but like the main reason I wanted to do this podcast is, we're hiring like crazy in Israel. So we're still looking for the best talent that we can find in Israel is basically Silicon Valley. As far as I'm concerned, the best engineers in the world are in two places, Silicon Valley and Israel. And I just want all of the engineers in Israel to know the mission we have as a company, that we put the product first, and we're really serious about getting better every single month. We're working on something important. We pay really well, and we have fun problems. So I just want to get the word out there as much as I possibly could.
What kind of jobs are you looking for in Israel?
It's all software engineering and or database administration and or data science. If you have any interest in machine learning or deep learning, or if you like building big, robust software that will be used by tens of millions of users, then we are the company for you.
And I can say that Yossi Taguri, who is your VP of engineering in Israel, is a really, really connected guy, and everyone can approach directly to him.
Yeah.
And he will be happy to speak with anyone that.
Yeah, and he's the guy that connected us to Ian, right?
He did.
Yeah.
He connected us. He asked me if I wanted to do a podcast, and I said, yes. Yes, I do.
Guys, I'm sorry, but we are out of time.
So Ian סיגל, co-founder and CEO of וזיפריקרוטר, thank you so much for joining us from the other side of the world.
It's been a pleasure, guys.
This podcast is available on Spotify and wherever you hear your podcast, כלכליסט. I'll switch to Hebrew now. אביב, אם אתה מאזין לפרק הזה ונהנית, אני ממליץ לך להאזין לעוד פרק באנגלית שעשינו על המגפה של רוב המנכ"ל של לייב פרסון.
לגמרי.
שהיה מאוד מאוד מעניין.
לגמרי. ואיין דיבר על חסויות לפודקאסטים, אז אנחנו צריכים להגיד גם תודה לנותנת החסות שלנו, אינטל איגנייט, שסיימה את המחזור השני המצוין שלה, וגייסה את המחזור השלישי, ועדיין רוצה להיות בקשר עם יזמות ויזמים של חברות מדהימות שגייסו $1,000,000 לפחות, חברות סטארט בשלבי צמיחה. אז אם אתם מעוניינים לעבוד עם ענקית הטכנולוגיה אינטל, שרכשה כמובן את מובילאיי והבאנה לאבס ומוביט, ולקבל ליווי צמוד של צוות מדהים, אז פשוט תכתבו להם ignite@intel.com. איגנייט זה ignite@intel.com. תסתכלו על רשימת הבוגרים, תתייעצו עם אנשים שהיו שם, אנחנו מאוד ממליצים. עד כאן.
יאללה, איאן, thank you.
Thanks a lot,
Thank you, guys. It's been fun.
Bye.
Bye.